weren't, then nothing would be anything. Okay?
So many non-believers then.
Okay. Excuse, what did you say, Cal?
Yeah, if that's the case, I mean, your points are good, and you're really good at what you do, Darth. But why aren't you so good at, making this whole Discord into believers?
You know what? Your last sentence was muffled.
Why is this whole Discord believers? After
that's the second time your microphone went out.
Can you hear me now?
I want you to repeat what you said, because you repeated again and it went out.
Okay, so you have really good points here, right? And so I forget what the part you said, but what I was saying to that is, why is there so many non-believers on this Discord when you prove all these points?
Oh, that's a good question. Because proof does not equate to persuasion. Because human beings have a sinful disposition, which we could characterize as would-be autonomy. So there's only two possible mental states. Either we are acknowledgement in terms of the autonomy of the mind of God, and if not, the individual will be proclaiming their own would-be autonomy. When the objective proof for God is given, the would-be autonomous man does not, when he's faced with this, does not want to repent of his would-be autonomy. So in order to retain his would-be autonomy, which is incoherent upon examination, but in order to retain his would-be autonomy, he's going to have to deny irrationally the objective grounding for God. That is why when an objectively provable case for God is presented, it is rejected. Objective proof is not the same thing as persuasion, because unbelievers are not just innocent bystanders that are practitioners of non-resistant non-belief. They are practitioners of resistant non-belief. They are first and foremost bitter clingers to their would-be autonomy. And I can prove that, okay? Because there's not a third option. Because if you don't acknowledge the autonomy of the mind of God, then you will be acknowledging directly or indirectly your own would-be autonomy. But because they love their autonomy and they don't want to get rid of it, they deny the objective case for the existence of God. And they do so irrationally. And I show every single day how atheists are irrational. I even have done it to 8 professional atheists with PhDs in AMA on Discord. And when I asked them to defend why there's no God, each and every one of them failed miserably. And if you don't believe me, you can look it up on YouTube. Those recordings are available for everyone to listen to. Every single one of them did not want to carry on the conversation. They did not want their atheism scrutinized. They did not want to be put in the spotlight of having to defend their atheism. They just wanted to be put in. They just wanted to be put into a position where they could lecture and monologue like a community college professor. But when they were challenged to demonstrate that God doesn't exist, they all wimped out.
So
I watched those debates, and you got destroyed in every one of them.
Like, okay, all right, yeah, okay, yeah. I said earlier we're not going to talk if you're going to do your fake woman voice, okay?
Yeah,
you're doing it again.
Just coping because you.
Okay, all right, yeah, okay. You can troll all you want, okay? We don't do trolling here. If you want to make a substantive disagreement here, if you want to do a little psychoanalysis, you can do it elsewhere. I'm not the one who's delusional about what's on my birth certificate, okay? Okay, so go ahead, Cal.
So why did they convert after you argued with them? And
of course not, because most men are fools. They don't want to repent. And that's what you're going to find out on Judgment Day. So the reason why people are atheists is not for intellectual reasons, is because they choose to be fools, regardless of their education, their academic achievement, regardless of their IQ. People are atheists because they're fools. They are denying the obvious. It is obvious that the world reveals God. And the reason why it's obvious that it denies it, in part, is that the denial thereof is impossible to sustain, okay? So everything individually and collectively is indicative and revelatory of the eternal. You're either going to have to accept that stipulation, or you're going to have to deny it. The reason why everything is indicative of the eternal, because if it wasn't, then nothing would be anything. Okay? So then if somebody wants to say, well, the rock outside my road or the tree blowing in the wind is not indicative of the eternal, well, then there's nothing that dictates what or why anything is. So it will be nothing at all. Okay? Now, your only alternative to escape absolute absurdity for things being natured objects or natured entities is to recognize that every natured entity that we come into contact with is indicative of and revelatory of the eternal, and it could only be indicative and revelatory of the eternal if and only if the eternal was a mind and purpose that it indicate why anything is. So this is why we can say God is objectively provable. Okay. And it's when we lay out the case, it's also a reductio ad absurdum, and you deny the reasoning. The reasoning that is presented, it results in absurdity. Because then go ahead.
Well, I mean, it almost feels like you're just It almost feels like you're just defining God to be true, right? You said like,
no,
well, God's definition.
I gave a reasoned defense for why God exists, and what I basically did is I said that God exists. And I unpacked it by saying, because God has revealed himself in and through his creation. I am not defining God into existence. Okay. I did not in the least define God into existence. I simply said that we assert that God is because God has revealed himself in and through creation. And that is the only possible way that anybody can instantiate God. You couldn't instantiate God unless and if God takes the initiative to disclose his existence. You couldn't instantiate God by pure reason.
But here's the thing, right? One of the property sets that you define your God to be is a creator God, correct?
Yeah. Do I hold the God of the Bible as a creator? Yes.
Well, that's how you define him to be, right? So it's almost like cyclical. You're just saying, well, he's a creator God.
No.
I view creation.
Listen. I don't think you're understanding. Listen.
I can't even finish though. Well, why is that?
We say he's a creator God because he reveals himself, and by virtue of that, we understand that he is the creator.
Right, but you already have it set in the beginning.
Okay,
Hugh,
is a creator God. You're not focusing. Listen, Hugh, I don't mind people.
You're not letting me finish, man. You're not letting me finish.
You're right. I'm not letting you finish. And
here's the reason why. Let atheists finish, right?
I'm going to, but you're going to have to up your game. You're not making. Okay, Hugh. Okay, have a nice day, Hugh. All right, bye. Okay, you want to bicker with me like a 13-year-old? Then you're done. Yeah, no, I'm not defining God into existence. I'm saying that God is because God has taken the initiative to reveal himself in creation. Okay, and that's the only way that we can invoke and instantiate God. Okay, now you can choose not to accept it, but if you choose not to accept it, then your mission, whether you choose to or not, is you're going to have to defend that proposition. You're going to have to defend that the world does not reveal God. Okay, now I've made a case for how the world reveals God. If you choose not to accept it, then you don't have the luxury there of just saying, no, you haven't proven it. Because if you open up your mouth, you're making an implicit counterclaim. The best that you should do is, if you're not going to accept the case that I made for God, is to sit there with your mouth shut and not open it so we know you're a fool. But if you're so foolish enough to open your mouth and defend that God does not exist and that he hasn't revealed himself creation, then you're going to have to defend the not God worldview. So it's best for a fool to keep their mouth shut when they deny that God has revealed himself. Because if you open up your mouth, you're going to have to defend that God did not reveal himself. And no, that's not shifting the burden of proof, because I've already made a case that God exists.
Has anyone actually converted? Or like for
how you have mental autonomy. Open up your mouth now. I'll listen to you. See, dead silence. You see, people are so accustomed to spewing out their atheist cliches. When they realize that the atheist cliches have been dismantled and destroyed and eviscerated, then they tend to keep quiet. Okay? Look, we have Atheist Junior in here who hosts a atheist YouTube channel where he presents his atheism on a regular basis. We spoke twice today. He made a complete fool of himself. He couldn't defend in the least that God doesn't exist. And all he just did was spew typical atheist cliches like there's no evidence for God. But when I asked him to defend that, he admitted he couldn't even defend that. He just said, when he says there's no evidence for God, that's just an explication of a statement of his own ignorance. So God doesn't exist because he's in a state of ignorance? I mean, this is how inept atheists are. Okay?
We have free will, right, Darth?
Yeah, can you get to your point? You ask this question all the time, and it's getting tiresome.
If we have free will, then we have mental autonomy.
No, I don't think you're understanding. The agency is not the same thing as autonomy. Mental autonomy for human beings means that you have a mind, you have a cognition, and you have a will that possesses actuality in a non-derivative, non-dependent way from God. Okay? That's what mental autonomy means. Mental autonomy does not mean the capacity to make choices. It means that you have the capacity to exercise cognition non-derivatively from the autonomous mind of God.
Do we have minds of our own?
Okay. Do you accept the autonomy of the mind of God? Yes or no?
Autonomy of the mind of God.
That only the mind of God is autonomous, and if we have a mind, our minds are derivative and dependent upon the autonomous mind of God. Do you accept that the mind of God is autonomous?
I don't know anything about that.
Okay, I asked you, do you accept it? I just explained to you what it is. It means that God's mind is self-contained, absolute, non-derivative, unconditionally non-dependent, and is the source of everything else that is not himself. Do you accept the autonomy of the mind of God?
The way you just defined it, no.
Okay, so the moment you say no, you are now implicitly claiming your own mental autonomy. Okay? Now, what ultimately dictates any instance of what is, can be, and cannot be, including your ability to reason? What ultimately dictates all instances?
Reality.
Okay, that's incoherent.
How is it incoherent?
Because all you're just simply saying is everything dictates everything. How is that informative?
How is it not informative?
Okay, goodbye. Goodbye. You're done. Okay. See, you see the foolishness that we're left with? Everything dictates everything? What does that even mean? And even if I were to grant that it's informative, which it is not, how could he defend it? Okay? How do you know, Brody, everything dictates everything? How do you know that?
I don't know that.
Okay, goodbye. Oh, and by the way, you're Asian, aren't you? Yep. See you later, Asian. Explicit.
I don't think that was him, but I could be wrong.
Evidence, here I am, guys.
He's been changing.
Has he been creeping around today?
Yes, he has. The guy with the name who uses the name God, you better change your name or I'm going to kick you from the room.
I think his name is Danny.
You going to change your username? Oh, he left. No, we deal with idiots on here. Idiot teenagers and an idiot teenager trapped in adult bodies. Okay? This is why atheists drop like flies against biblical presuppositionalism.
Hey, Darth, I have an honest question.
Go ahead.
So I'm a Christian, and I'm really interested in listening to you because I think it's interesting to hear apologetics and how to defend the faith. But I have an honest question about explaining how God reveals himself through creation. Can you unpack that and explain it a bit? So
That's a great question. Okay, so everything God creates that we come into contact with is a revelation from God. So when God breathed the breath of life into Adam and he opened up his mind and he had immediate consciousness and he looked around and he saw the trees and he saw the grass blowing in the wind. That was a revelation from God. Do you understand that?
Yeah.
So when Adam had even momentary self-consciousness, even that is a revelation of God. So whatever God creates that we come into contact with is a revelation of God, even if man reformulates certain things that God creates. So if you look at a baseball bat, that's just a reformulated piece of tree, okay?
Mhm.
So even the reformulation through man's cognition and man's handiwork and skill from a tree or wood into bat, it's still a revelation of God. So when you are actually talking with another person, okay, that's a revelation from God, because you wouldn't be talking to another mind, nor would you yourself be a mind unless it were begotten of the eternal, which is a mind. Okay?
Mhm.
So when we say that God exists, we don't reason by pure reason and then tell people, well, God is the best explanation of why anything exists. We say that God is the only explanation of what exists, and the reason why is because God has revealed himself in an undeniable and irrefutable way. It makes no difference that the unbelievers laugh to themselves when they say, well, if it's so undeniable and irrefutable, why are there so many unbelievers? Well, the answer to the question is because they don't want there to be a God, and they're fools. And so they reject the notion that God has revealed himself in creation, which such a denial is indefensible whatsoever. It cannot be defended. And so because they want to preserve and protect their would-be autonomy, which is incoherent on its own terms, but they nonetheless want to preserve it. And so what they do is they concoct for themselves all sorts of rationales and cliches and slogans, which are incoherent upon examination, but it satisfies their own poor thinking as to why they don't have to believe in God. But their reasons for not believing in God are not coherent. They're simply incoherent on their own terms.
See. Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's difficult to talk with them sometimes because the ones I've spoken with, they require concrete evidence for everything. They're like,
Well, that's not true. They're liars.
yeah. And I'm just like, I don't like, what is the best way to tackle that argument where they will come to you and they'll say, well,
To
there's no
confront
concrete evidence.
then they're liars about that, because they accept the
She's
not
also
God.
Hindu.
They accept the not God world without concrete evidence, don't they?
Yeah.
So what you
sure.
need to do is you must not deal with them as though they're neutral participants, that they're just eager little beavers waiting to believe. Okay? Like when they say, well, show me the evidence. Well, the evidence has already been given. The moment they say, prove to me God exists, they're displaying their disingenuousness. Okay?
Mhm. I see what you mean. Yeah, I think that makes sense.
Well, I think there's a fine line, because again, if you're talking about the times in which a lot of these like sodomy laws, right? A lot of these things were kind of put in place not only from just a religious perspective, but from a legalistic one. The perspective often was not so much so that, hey, look, let's restrict people. It was more so, hey, look, we need to encourage people to make babies and make as many as possible. And any pattern of behavior that's discouraging that is not in the interest of not only the public, but of me as a politician and the government as an entity.
The government as an entity will lose people, so they give out patronage to jobs like the military to gender dysphorics. Actual mentally ill people. Okay? One thing about having gays in there, I mean, that's been